Hey Bob, how are you?
Pretty good. How about yourself?
I'm doing all right. Had a good weekend?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, Laura and I went out to dinner the other night, so that was nice.
Okay. Well, that's good. Where'd you go?
Her favorite, El Nepal.
On
Oh,
the
that's right.
fall.
Yeah, we went to Longhorn too. That's right.
At the same time?
No, no.
Oh, okay. Great. That's great. Hey Todd, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing all right. Good weekend?
Yeah, pretty good. Pretty good. Nice and pretty out.
Yeah, it's great.
How are you, Lauren
Uh,
Bob?
Doing okay.
Good.
How about yourself?
Yeah, can't complain. Can't complain.
Nobody listens anyway.
Right?
I actually feel really, really good. We put a $11 trillion lien on CPS last night. Just through my litigation, going through the P chart, everything that they've really done illegally, it wouldn't even fit all of it. So I'll let y'all know how that turns out.
did you
Wow.
say $11 trillion?
Yes, sir. And I put 400 and something million on my worker, and they gave us a new worker this week. They haven't returned our child, but they got rid of the worker. Um, so yes, and I've actually put a lien on the judge too.
Wow, you are making some headway with that litigation knowledge. Yeah, that's fantastic. Congratulations.
That's awesome.
When it comes down to it, you can't put a price on my daughter. And she has CF. So she's one of those children that they're literally making like 30 grand off a day. So you figure they've had her for 27 months and they're making 30 grand a day plus all the damage they've caused, the social security fraud. I mean, I could just go on and on. I could go for a whole hour on all the charges and unlawful things that they have done. And stepping into my political status like I have has given me the power to actually do these things. So it is a great relief, even though our daughter isn't here. And we did get to go see her sing yesterday, even though we only actually talked to her for 15 minutes. We were allowed to see her sing at her. It was like they only have 4 days of school left, so this was like, I guess, a kind of not a graduation, but the school put on, a choir practice for the parents to attend. So that was very nice. And I made her skyline, and she was so happy. And then we got there, and her paper said, "My mom's favorite thing to eat is skyline. My favorite thing to eat that she makes is skyline." So, my mom was from Cincinnati, so I have the skyline going through me kind of hard. I love it. She actually taught me to make Emperor's chili, which is the same as Cincinnati chili. But I'm sure, Todd, you're familiar because you live up north. So, but it
Yeah,
was
I'm actually
really good.
familiar with it, but we don't like any of the Skyline or what's the other one?
Gold
Uh,
Star.
Gold
Gold
Star.
Star. Yeah. I guess being from Central Kentucky, I'm not really because well, I'm not too awfully far where we were originally from you. You're in Shelby, Tom. I was from Washington County originally. So, but anyway, yeah, it's a bit different, but each to their own.
Yeah, I grew up in Cincinnati, so I'm
Oh, did you?
well familiar. Yeah. Well, hey folks,
I'm
we'll go
not
ahead.
crazy about Skyline, but Loris is much better than Skyline. Much.
I'm sure homemade is excellent. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm gonna go ahead and start screen sharing. We'll get started. Can everybody see Jural Assembly Handbook on the screen?
Yes. Has anyone touched base with Nick? Because I know he wanted to be in the Jural Assembly trainings, and I don't see him here.
Okay. Not sure if he's on that text group that went out.
I don't believe he's on the text group, but I can send him this link right now if you want me to.
Yeah, if you don't mind, Laura, that'd be great. You volunteer to read the Bivens decision for me?
I'll read it.
Thanks, Todd.
All right. This meeting is private. Bearing false witness, misrepresentation, and posting inflammatory rhetoric in public forums is forbidden and shall be addressed in an appropriate manner. To eliminate all conflict and false allegations, is there anyone in attendance at today's meeting that is a member or agent of any law enforcement agency or public agency of the federal, state, county, city, or township agencies present? Additionally, are there any U.S. citizens or citizens of the United States present? Anyone who is here under false pretenses, anyone who is working for any foreign government, including the territorial United States or municipal United States, anyone who is being paid or coerced to be here must fully disclose their presence and purpose now, or leave the premises. If they subsequently show up as federal witnesses, they are discredited for failure to disclose. Is there any response to the Bivens decision?
Thanks, Todd.
You're welcome.
I apologize for the cancellation last week, but I had forgotten about Mother's Day, and I think it was probably the right call, at least for me and my family. It was slow going Sunday at brunch, and I would have never made it back in time. So I hope everyone was okay with flexing and canceling.
No worries.
This week we're gonna try to get through it in 6 weeks, so I'm gonna try to get through 15 chapters today. 45 is not a big deal. You can go back and watch the recording if you like, or but we'll just cover the basics today and try to get this done this week and next week. Once again, our purpose today is to know basic definitions and oppositions and roles so that everyone understands what they are doing and why. We're talking about the Jural Assembly Handbook, building our pillar. The purpose of today is, and our goal ultimately, once again, is to place the Kentucky Jural Assembly on solid foundation to begin building our Jural Assembly pillar. So by watching today's training, we're not going to be experts on the Jural Assembly Handbook. That's an individual effort. Today's effort is to put so that we can say as a group that we have gone through the Jural Assembly Handbook and we have comfortable foundation to begin building the pillar. Ask questions as needed. I'm going to try to keep an eye on the hands raised. And if you need to, just speak up and ask all your questions. And we'll try to get it done. I'm going to try to stop it at an hour and a half. If I go over, somebody let me know. Chapter 31, mandatory citizenship requirements. Our American government is the United States. That's our soil jurisdiction. The United States of America is that land that underneath that first 6 inches is the United States of America, the land jurisdiction. And you notice the asterisk there for United States and United States of America is that there is no dual citizenship. I'm going to read from the book. Anna says the land and soil jurisdiction states require us to have a single citizenship and allegiance to them. They don't allow any form of dual citizenship and never have. The founders adhered to the principle that no man can serve two masters and did not allow conflicted people, that's people with conflicts of interest, such as loyalty to the king, to participate in state government. So any kind of connection tie that we have to the federal government, we need to get rid of that. And so then the states of America, that's the Confederation, they operate in the municipal jurisdiction, global municipal jurisdiction operated by persons, not people. They are undefined corporations. That is the federal government. Questions on that? Chapter 32. It's titled "The Federal States of States." And Anna kept using this word inchoate, and I had no idea what it meant. So I just put the definition up there. It's an adjective. It describes being only partly in existence or operation, imperfectly formed. All right, so when you see that word inchoate, that means something that's not quite where it needs to be. Anna said that we need a thorough understanding of the federal states of states, also known as Confederate states, before we discuss the American Civil War. And so this has been really good education for me, understanding what the federal states are, the Confederate states, what that is. Because when you think about the Civil War and who fought it, it's much different when you have this understanding of who actually fought the war. So the Confederate states, and she has 6 things that she talks about here in section 32. Number 1 is the Confederate states are the ones that were set up underneath the Articles of Confederation in 1781, right? She describes them as inchoate, not quite formed, not 100%. And they're legal fictions, right? They're not geographically defined. And I think that was a good way for me to understand the states of America, the Confederate states, is that the sole jurisdiction, the states have geographical boundaries. The land has geographical boundaries, but the states of America are legal fictions. Right? They don't have defined boundaries, right? So keep that in mind when you think about Confederate states. Continuing with the thorough understanding of the federal Confederate states. Point number 3 was they are corporations. Federal states of states are corporations created by state governments. So the example would be Georgia chartered the state of Georgia. So we the people, we on the soil and the land created the state governments, the state of Kentucky, state of Ohio, state of Georgia. Those were all created by us at one time. Point number 4 is the original federal states of states were all named using the same style of proper name. That means they capitalized the capital T-H-E and included it in the name. So as we see in point 3 there, the state of Georgia, that's how it was originally styled, and that was the same for all the states. Point 5, she says the federal / Confederate states of states were members of the States of America Union. And so this, again, was really important for me to understand this union and what we're talking about in the preamble to the Constitution. It says this union is the union referenced in the preamble. Right, so when it says we're making a more perfect union, well, that's not we the people on the states and the land and soil. They're talking about making a more perfect thing that doesn't exist and doesn't have actual boundaries, a more perfect legal fiction, right? Because land and soil is perfect as it's ever going to get, right? It is the people, it is the land. But this corporation that they formed to conduct the business of the country, it is not perfect. It is corporate. It's man-made. It's a fiction, right? So they're trying to make that as perfect as possible. So I thought that was a good good way to understand the constitutions and the difference between the United States of America, and the states of America, which is the Confederate part. And so here's the preamble. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union. So I had always just assumed and thought and been taught, I guess, that that was talking about us, we the people in the Declaration. But when you look at it and under this lens, that's not the case. This thing we're trying to form more perfectly is this artificial legal fiction, right? Establish justice, and at the end of it says, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. So just a reference. So the States of America Confederation, that is the union that is being perfected by the constitutions, not the United States and not the United States of America. That was all new for me. I don't know if y'all had thought of it in that way before, but thinking of that more perfect union being something that was created, the legal fiction, it makes a lot of sense. And when we get to the Civil War and actually who's fighting it, it'll make more sense. And so these federal states of states, these Confederate states, these legal fictions, these corporate entities operate exclusively in global municipal jurisdiction, right? They never come back to the land and soil. They operate in their world only. Any questions, anything to add on chapter 32? Did I muddy those waters pretty good, or was that was that understandable to some degree?
Understandable. I just think that because of the way it was done, they made it confusing on purpose. And so you just have to pay attention, what's being said or how it's written to understand which one they're referencing. But I yield.
Absolutely, and if you're not paying attention, then look what happened at the end of the Civil War. So it's a good point. Chapter 33, the American Civil War. She starts off by talking about this Treaty of Verona. Ever done any digging, research on this secret Treaty of Verona?
I've never heard of it.
You never heard of it?
Mm-mm.
I had come across it through some research about a year ago, and it's very interesting. But the thing that really stuck out to me the first time I pulled it up was the date that it was apparently signed. Did anybody notice anything interesting about the date?
1822.
November 22nd. November 22nd was the day that Kennedy was shot in Dealey Plaza. And so, to me, it really cemented the power of the deep state and how demented they are and how they do everything with a certain amount of timing. Dates are important, numbers are important, all that stuff. Because if you think about what the secret Treaty of Verona, what it was about at its core, it says down here in bold, the high contracting powers, and Anna describes that, defines that a little bit. Bankers, Rothschilds, and so on, the Holy Roman Empire. Their goal was to use all their efforts to put an end to the system of representative governments. And so they wanted to do away with what we had here, that our republic. And so if you think about what Kennedy was trying to do at the start of his presidency, remember he had talked about shattering the CIA into 1 million pieces. He had instituted the silver dollar, the silver-backed dollar, the United States dollar, right? So he had brought back real money. And he actually had printed out a lot of United States dollars backed by silver. And so he was trying to promote and get back to representative government, give the power back to the people. Well, this secret treaty of Verona, the powers that be, they said, well, we're not going to have that. And so the fact that they chose November 22nd to snuff out the one man who had the power at the time to give us back what we needed, I thought was chilling. I'm not, maybe it's just coincidence, but from what I've seen, these people operate with purpose, and so I thought that was interesting. So the monarchists in the Holy Roman Empire agreed to secretively undermine, I should say, our government. The king funded both sides of the war. The British and the French backed the North, and the British and the Holy Roman Empire backed the South in the Civil War. The members of the original Confederation, remember we talked about the legal fiction, the Confederation of federal states and states doing business as the States of America, all of them were commercial corporations chartered by their states, took the European bait and went to war with each other. So I tried to think of an analogy to help me not only solidify my thinking about this, but to be able to tell it to others. And I thought of, well, let's say my house, I had a house fire. My house suffered a lot of damage, wasn't destroyed, but I needed to call in somebody to fix it. So I called in ServPro to clean up the mess, and I hired a contractor to rebuild my house. So I had to move out, and while I'm gone, ServPro and the contractor get together and they say, hey, let's take over this house for ourselves. And so how are we going to do that? Well, let's have a big fight in the house, and we'll make a mess, and we'll blame it on somebody else, and then we can make it what we want. At the end of it, we'll do our own plans, and we'll have our own way of, we'll just do it the way we want. So basically you have two hired contractors fighting it out on your property, using all your stuff and making a big giant mess. And in the midst of it, you're out of commission. And while you're gone and off the property, they just redo everything in your house. And that's basically what I think happened is these two corporations that have this big fight, this war, make a huge mess, and then they do what they want on the back end of it. Never let a good crisis go to waste, right? So 1863, the North was bankrupt, and then a couple of years later, the South was in ruins. And there was no peace treaty because there wasn't a declared war, right? The corporations, the ServPro and the contractor basically said, well, we got what we want, so we can stop fighting. And that's what they did. But the important thing to realize is that we, the people, in the Declaration, we, the people on the soil and the land, never had anything to do with that fight. Right? It was all between two legal fictions. At least that's the way I think she's trying to point it out. Does that make sense? Am I on the right track?
Yeah, that sounds like that's the way I understand it.
All right. So then moving on from after the mess, what is our job? What are we doing? What should we keep in mind moving forward? Reconstruction. She starts off by saying that a British territorial military junta, and I had an issue with that word, so I looked it up, and one of the definitions of a junta is a group of military officers ruling a country after seizing power. So this British junta was in control of Washington, D.C. after the war. There was a puppet government installed by force in the South. So the South was defeated, and because of that defeat and all that chaos, they send from D.C. this government says, hey, we're from the government, we're in charge, right? So she says that territorial delegates were sent from the South to Washington. So these territorial delegates came down, took over the South, said, hey, we're the government now, and that's what they sent back to Washington. So at the end of the day, you have North Territorial and South Territorial people, persons, right? Not land and soil. Territorial Tories, however you want to think of it, they're operating Congress, right? And they say, we're in charge. This is your government now. But it was really a substitute for our Confederate government, right? It should have been the government that we created, the legal fiction that we created as the people, but instead it was a usurpation, a substitute. And they tried to play nice. They tried to act like they were doing the right thing and came up with the Reconstruction Acts, which were emergency measures by a foreign government, which they were, to maintain control during transition back to normal government. But the problem is they never let the transition happen purposefully. And she says that these Reconstruction Acts violated the constitutions in several ways. One of them was that the federal government, the substitute federal government, has been operating unlawfully and illegally ever since. And I put down the Treaty of Verona there because the goal of the Treaty of Verona was, let's see, what was it? Was to get rid of representational government. And so what have they done now? They've instituted this substitute territorial corporate legal fiction government instead of what we really had. And apparently at the time, nobody was none the wiser. Our goal is to create our own American subcontractors, basically have a constitutional convention and redo our contractors, right? Once our states are established, we can redo these contractors. She says the people of each one of our states need to charter our state's commercial corporation under their own state's sovereign authority and then join as a member of the States of America. So basically reconstruct, redo what they did in 1781, 1787, Articles of Confederation and the constitutions, redo all that stuff because it's a substitute. All right, any questions on chapter 34? Chapter 35 was hard for me. I had a really hard time with, yeah.
Hey, Tom,
Yeah.
before we jump into 35, so she's saying the articles is a substitute? The Articles of Confederation?
I don't think I hope I didn't say that. The Congress is the substitute, right?
Okay.
So after the war was over, the British-backed corporation basically sent these delegates down and did this puppet government, right?
Right. So that was the Congress during the Civil War is what you're saying.
During and after.
Right, right. Okay. I just, when you said something, maybe I just misheard you. I just was trying to clarify that because that was much earlier. So I was gonna say that didn't make a lot of sense. So I'm probably just misheard you.
Yeah, and I might have said it wrong too. But thanks for.
That's fine. Go ahead, proceed with 35.
35 was tough for me because I just don't know that I understand what she's trying to say and so what I wanted to do is define some definitions because I had a hard time with this chapter. So she starts off by saying it's important for state Jural assemblies and the state general assemblies to understand the concepts of persons. So what is a person? She says in the handbook, a handle, a utility, a representation, an image, or a persona, but it is not a living being. Easy enough. She says that persons fall into three categories: unincorporated, corporate, and incorporated. And this is kind of where I started falling off the rails, because these definitions weren't clear for me. So unincorporated, Bouvier's doesn't have a definition of unincorporated. Black's Law Dictionary says it's a group of people. That's what we are, a group of people who act together in a common enterprise for a common purpose. Not legal fictions, not persons, not corporate. Webster's says that unincorporated means it lacks corporate status, not formed into a legal corporation, not incorporated.
Do you know what year that was?
Corporation in Bouvier's, in the case of Dartmouth College against Woodward, Chief Justice Marshall describes a corporation to be an artificial being, invisible, intangible, existing only in contemplation of law. Black says it's an artificial person or legal entity. And Webster says it's formed into an association and endowed by law with the rights and liabilities of an individual or incorporated. So now that word incorporated, Bouvier says the term is frequently confounded, particularly in old books, with corporation. The distinction is that by incorporation, it's understood that the act by which a corporation is created. Corporation is, by corporation is meant the body thus created. Black's Law Dictionary says incorporated is the term that means to function as a corporation. Webster says it's formed into a legal corporation. So here's where I had a problem. She says in the book, the persons fall in three categories: unincorporated, corporate, and incorporated. From what I understand, incorporated is an act. It's basically an adverb. An adverb describes a verb. So these two are adjectives to describe a person. This is an act. Incorporation is the act of becoming corporate. So either there's something I'm not understanding, or just so that's why I had a hard time, because she's trying to describe three different categories, but I only see two, and she only describes two in the chapter. So
Yeah, I'm with you. It should look like it would be unincorporated or incorporated, the way I'm seeing it. I don't know, is that the way you were seeing it?
Either one or two, or one or three.
Right,
because it seemed to me like
the difference is, like you said, not a living being. So that would be the unincorporated. So the incorporated, which would include the corporation, even if that's the act, is just a legal fiction. So it's not a live person. So I was just trying to think of, like, for instance, where I'm changing my business over to an unincorporated business. Now the question is, if I do a DBA, which is doing business as, then that's like a legal fiction there. So, you know what I'm saying? I could do a business as like before it was Carney Restoration or whatever, but it had LLC, so it was incorporated. So even if I drop that, that's still a legal fiction, because that doesn't, that's not me as a person. So it does make it very confusing. I see exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, it was very, very confusing for me. And it might just be a place where we need more personal, individual study on it. I think for our General Assembly purpose, we just need to know that those terms are out there, and be familiar as we can with what they are. But part where I really had issue was that this incorporated, as far as I could tell, it's an act, whereas the other two are are just a description of somebody. Hey, Tom is unincorporated, or Tom is corporate. Well, how does Tom become corporate? Well, you have to incorporate to become corporate. So it was confusing.
We are considered unincorporated persons. And I put corporation, a definition of it in the chat along with authority.
Okay, awesome. That's thanks for that, Laura. But I think what there's Bouvier's definition of a person, artificial. Yeah, thanks for that, Laura. But what made it even more confusing for me was that later on in the chapter, she says the first two kinds of persons, unincorporated and corporate, are lawful persons. And then later on, a little bit later, she says all lawful persons are unincorporated. So I was like, which one is it? Is it, can you be lawful, unincorporated and corporate, unincorporated and corporate, or is it this one? It was a tough chapter for me. Maybe just one I need to go through again and see if there's any updates to it.
I agree. I think that's why she calls us living man or woman, because she said not to be persons or human, because humans are monsters, supposedly. So that's why we claim to be living men and women, if that makes sense. I hope that helps. I yield.
Yeah. I think you're right. Thanks, Laura. All right, moving on to chapter 36. It's titled State Assemblies. It says the state assemblies control land and sea, except that the Constitution's made significant concessions. So the states, when they came about, the country was a baby. They didn't have the ability to protect their shipping, didn't know how to conduct trade amongst the states, so they hired that out, right? So those are some of the concessions that were made in the Constitution. Our state General Assembly is composed of electors, and that's a whole nother subject that I need more study on. Is what is a qualified elector versus an unqualified elector? Our General Assembly has 2 electors in each county, and the General Assembly is in session as necessary, weekend or months. As necessary. That's the General Assembly and the electors. The State Jural Assembly purpose is to enforce public law and the constitutions, to run the people's court and elections. And the State Jural Assembly runs all year 24/7. So keep that in mind when you're recruiting potential jurors. Make sure they know that it's a full-time job. This talks about the State Executive Assembly, which I had never heard of before, but the Executive Assembly is elected at the General Assembly. It does routine business for the state, public notices and elections, oversees use and sale of state resources, and functions throughout the year. That's the State Executive Assembly. Questions on section chapter 36? Chapter 37 is titled The Interface. It says there is only one interface between lawful persons and legal persons, and that interface occurs in international jurisdiction. So when a lawful person crosses the boundary and becomes a legal person, that is an unlawful conversion or a transgression. When a legal person crosses and becomes a lawful person, a lawful conversion has occurred. I call it a trespass. That was about clear as mud to me. I don't know if anybody else had issues with that, but I think I understand what she's trying to say. To differentiate the transgression and trespass between the 2 terms. And then chapter 38 did a nice job at the beginning of this, kind of breaking out, um, the three, parts of our country, the United States of America, and then the states of America. So this, I thought, did a nice job. The United States is our combined national sole jurisdiction. It's our states. Formed on July 1st, 1776, declared via the Declaration of Independence, lawful, unincorporated Union of State Republics. We're on the soil, top 6 inches of the land. And then the United States of America, that's our land jurisdiction and sea. Federation of States, formed on September 9th of 1776, declared by the Act of the Continental Congress, lawful, unincorporated, and it's the land below the soil. And then when you cross the bar, once again, going back to the interface in chapter 37, that's where you can either trespass or transgress. So that's the states of America. That's the Confederation operating in global jurisdiction. When was that formed? March 1, 1781, by the Articles of Confederation. Now we're in legal territory. We've crossed the bar. We're incorporated. Global municipal jurisdiction, commercial, territorial. Right. So I thought that was a good breakout of the 3 different entities. Chapter 39, parting of the waters. Legal commercial government is federal, territorial, and municipal, as opposed to what we were taught, right? The 3 branches of government, executive, judicial, legislative. 3 branches in the legal Confederate world. The federal world is federal, territorial, and municipal. Federal does the lion's share of the business, right? That was our initial Confederate group of states, right? Confederate States of America. Their purpose was to do the trade, do the shipping, do all that stuff, right? And the Constitution was for and small U united. They chose to delegate some of their powers, though, right? And so those delegations were operated by deputies chosen by the state legislatures. The second branch, the territorial branch, controls the naval armed services, the commercial fleets. They do trade policies. And their constitution is Constitution of the United States. They're operated by British territory, United States, as a democracy. So when you hear all this talk, you see those video clips of the news. People keep saying it's a threat to our democracy over and over again. That's what they're talking about. Talking about the territorial government, not our land and soil government. But do we have a democracy? Yes. But it's that legal fiction Confederate government. The last was municipal, members of the federal Congress. But once again, it's that substitute territorial folks that have taken over. Their purpose was to operate DC as a neutral meeting ground for the states and the people. They're given the power to operate as a plenary oligarchy. And what that means is it's a complete government by the few. So plenary is complete, and oligarchy means government by the few. So if you think about it, it's really a dictatorship. It was set up to be that way, to control that 10 square miles in DC. Right? But they were given a job and said, "This DC, this is yours. This is how you're going to operate it." So there can be a neutral meeting ground. But of course, that has been taken advantage of and corrupted. So
Hey, Tom, Laura's got her hand up.
Go ahead, Laura.
I just want to say, when I was growing up, of course, I went to Catholic school, but we were always taught that oligarchy was wrong. And here, we find out that that's in fact what they were running. And it's just part of the indoctrination and how much they've lied to us. And I yield with that.
No, that's a great point. There's so much deception and lies out there, especially in our public schools and what we've been taught. And to think that at the beginning, the folks that were set up to run DC were given all this power, and they found a way to just use that power behind the scenes to control us all. It's pretty amazing. It's a good point.
What's even more amazing is God's calling us to hold them accountable.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to at some point. We'll get there. So of course, there's been a lot of fraud. They've taken this power, this assignment they've been given, and because of the chaos, they've morphed it into something that they can use and benefit from. Never let a good crisis go to waste. The original territorial constitution that operated the Constitution of the United States was deceitfully reconfigured as articles of incorporation of a new Scottish commercial corporation doing business as the United States of America Incorporated. So now, instead of the United States of America, and the States of America, we have a single commercial corporation operating under foreign control, right? And the members that substitute Congress, they took over as a board of directors. And so any kind of amendment that we have passed doesn't require ratification, i.e. the 14th Amendment, the 16th Amendment. They don't require ratification because the board of directors controls the articles of incorporation. Right, that plenary oligarchy, government of the few. How do we want this to operate? We're going to make it look like this is your country, but really behind the scenes, the 14th Amendment didn't require ratification. It was never properly ratified. It was brought up in Congress, and nothing was done about it. Didn't ratify it. Louisiana didn't ratify it. I mean, over and over again, all these states never ratified the 14th Amendment, but here it is on the books. And this made total sense to me. How can that happen? Well, because it's a plenary oligarchy. It's a board of directors. It's a different set of rules, but they play nice and make it look like everything's good to go. Chapter 40, it's called grocery shopping. She says, as we're rebuilding our state, rebuilding our Jural assemblies, she says, don't look at the constitutions, right? That was an agreement for our contractors, for people working for us. That's not where we look to rebuild. We need to look at the state archives, the statehood compacts. We're in the process of revitalizing states, right? We're trying to rebuild our land and soil, not that legal fiction. If we want to look at that legal fiction, yes, let's look at the Constitution and see what they're supposed to do, not the states of states. We're looking at Kentucky State. And so in order to rebuild Kentucky State, we need to look at state archives. I thought that was a really, really good point.
How would we even get access to the state archives, though, with the government being the one that would give it to us?
I think you could go to Frankfurt. I think you could look at the state archive. They have a lot of stuff online. Archives.gov, I think, or archives.org. And you can look at a lot of this stuff online. And I think Kentucky does have a state archive. I don't know exactly where it is. Yeah, if they would let you look at it, that's a good point. 41, who owns what? the British monarch controls the U.S. Navy and the commercial fleet, all the trade policies, and the territorial possessions of Guam and America and Samoa. That's the Constitution of the United States of America. Holy Roman Empire and Westminster. And I'm not kind of confused about why Westminster has evolved. The Holy Roman Empire, what that connection is. I'm not really sure about what that is, but the Holy Roman Empire controls Washington, D.C., and their constitution is the Constitution of the United States. So I think that kind of goes back to that three city-state idea, right? The Vatican, they have a pillar in the Vatican. City of London has a pillar shaped like the Washington Monument, and then Washington, D.C. So all three of these places are operating in conjunction, I think, to carry on the wishes of, how did she put it, the not the powers that be, but the controlling what term did she use? Anyway, the deep state folks that are really pulling the strings. But our state assembly owns and controls the state of state, right? Once we are established as a state, we'll have power over the governor to tell him what to do. We'll have power over our state resources. We will have the power to decide fees and charges, which ones we want and which ones we don't want. So while right now they control all this stuff via the constitutions, we have actual access once we are established and running as a state. Chapter 42 was about the United States Raj, some really good history in there if you're a history buff. I was never familiar with the term Raj, so that's been educational for me. And I think this was really interesting to think about India being this kind of in the same boat as the United States at one point, being manipulated by the Brits. And so I'm just going to read in a minute. I'm going to read. So the British ruled in India at about the same time as in the United States, but India was able to overthrow the Raj in the 1940s with Gandhi and the demonstrations that they did. So what was the difference? Why was India able to throw them off while we were still basically under British rule? And so Anna says the British did the same thing here and at the same time in the 1860s, but they could use deceit to get away with it here in the United States because they had many Tory sycophants ready to willingly subject themselves to the Queen, and even more clueless wonders ready to do anything for a paycheck, and mostly of all because they could pass themselves and their flunkies off as Americans. It's a lot harder for a Brit to pretend to be a native of Calcutta than it is to say he's from Maine. All right, so there was that skin color difference. The Tories could say, "Hey, I'm a Mainer or I'm a Kentuckian," much more easy than they could do the same thing in India. They were easy to spot. The Indians knew who they were. There was no way or it was harder to make the deceit happen. So I thought that was really an interesting discussion. And she says the public opinion of the world must be turned against the British interlopers and the Holy Roman Empire with equal force, right? That's where we have to get. That's where we have to get to. So I think what she's saying is any kind of information that we can give to the folks who still have their eyes closed about how deceptive and destructive the monarchy is and the Holy Roman Empire, we can use that information to open folks' eyes. I mean, my mom is all about the Queen. Anything with the Queen, she would watch it, and the weddings and how great the Queen is and what a nice, go ahead, Laura.
I was enjoying what you were saying.
Just going to say that, being raised Catholic, I've really looked into this Pope thing, and he's ruling like most of the world. And in my personal opinion, I think that he will be the false prophet that the Bible talks about. just because of the corruption. He has a telescope named Lucifer, and we all know what NASA has been, the lies they've been trying to, to put across. I don't know if you two or if you all believe about landing on the moon, but a lot of people are discrediting that, saying that, they filmed it underwater, we never touched the moon, those kind of things. So I just wanted to say that I've been looking into the Pope, and it saddens me because I come from a Catholic family, and most of my family, it seems like they just worship this Pope and they don't have God in them to show them the truth or something. I don't know. They're being um, deceived, and that's what Satan uses is lies. But the Pope, he buys. He's the one that buys all our birth certificates. He's the one that trades us on stock markets. I mean, it's that bad, and most the world thinks he's a Christian, and he's not. And I'll yield with that.
That's a great point about the Pope and all that. What a deception. And I think just most people just don't know. They haven't been shown the other side of the Vatican. They haven't even been introduced to the possibility that it's a bad egg. And I think going back to that Treaty of Verona, one of the other sections of that treaty was how they were going to accomplish getting rid of representational government, and they were going to use the media. It said we have to have control of the media to make this happen, to get rid of representational government. I don't know what the media looked like in 1822, but back in 1822, their goal was to use the media to promote their propaganda and suppress the real facts. And so that's what's been done with the monarchy, the papacy. Everybody thinks it's so great, they're so benevolent and wonderful, and they're just this thing that sits on the shelf. They don't really do anything, just to look at, and the Pope is awesome and wonderful, but they never see anything bad because the media controls what we see about it. So and the media, I did some research on raw milk this week. Anita sent me some stuff on raw milk, and if you Google raw milk, the first 10 things you're going to see are how bad it is and how terrible it is for you and how you can get sick and all this disease. And that's exactly what, I mean, the milk lobby is huge in this country. And they want pasteurization, and the powers that be want pasteurization because it destroys a perfect food. I mean, raw milk is directly from the father, and it's awesome for you, and it has all the good bacteria that you need and all the proteins and everything. Pasteurization kills all that stuff. And so, of course, they don't want us to know about how awesome raw milk is. But the media has killed any kind of they've demonized raw milk, right, in the media. And so that's the power of the media for you. Moving on, we talked about lawful persons, and we're going to talk about legal persons. This was a little bit easier because we kind of know what a legal person is, right? It's not a real person, it's a fiction, artificial. Legal persons are never totally unincorporated. They always derive their personhood from some other entity and have no basis to exist on their own. A legal person does not exist on the land. A legal person is not one of the people. Legal fiction. And they live by and adhere to statutes, codes, and regulations. How does one become a legal person? I thought this was a good list. By signing up for federal civil service, get a job. U.S. military, an application for political asylum, an application for unearned federal welfare benefits, an application for a driver's license. If you have a US passport versus a USA passport. Go ahead, Laura.
So when I was teaching for JCBS, is that considered a federal civil service? Is that what made me a legal person? Because I was.
I'm having a hard time hearing you, Laura.
I'm sorry, I had you on speaker so I could hear.
Oh, okay.
So my question is, so for me, I was a teacher. Does that go under the federal civil service? Is that what made me a legal person in their eyes? Because I was teaching, in a government setting?
Well, I don't know. I don't know, Laura. I doubt it unless it was a federal position. I don't think a state qualified teacher qualifies as a federal position, but I could be wrong.
I would
Thank
agree
you.
with you, Tom.
I think if you were working in DC or for let's say you were a teacher for like on a military base or overseas on a military base, would probably be considered a federal position. But I think normally teachers are licensed by their individual state, and I don't think that qualifies as a federal position. I could be wrong. But I think what puts us all into the C jurisdiction is our birth certificate. And as it says down there at the bottom is that voter registration. I had a discussion with Todd Doyle about the voter registration this week. And have y'all done your, submitted your letter to cancel your voter registration?
Yeah, I have.
Because that's a big one, I think. Because we're trying to say we're back on the land and soil, but the county, the state has a roster saying that you want to vote in their C jurisdiction elections. So which one is it? That's a huge conflict of interest right there, right? That dual citizenship thing. So that cancellation is a must. But as soon as you register to vote, you're saying, yes, I want to vote in your legal fiction corporate C jurisdiction elections. Right?
I'm having trouble with the passport. So I paid $270 to do my passport for nothing because they gave me back my old passport, gave me no card. So yeah,
They didn't issue a new passport?
no, because mine was still valid. They said it's a good passport, and they don't do refunds. And because of the way they did it, and they wouldn't look at anything as anything being changed. So I guess the passport has to be destroyed or reported as lost or stolen because they wouldn't do anything with it. So I basically wasted my time and money for it.
Yeah.
Todd, did you use the Moonshine website that has
Yeah,
been given?
I went off of that. That didn't work for me.
Okay. Well, we don't have a passport yet, so I was hoping it would work for us. So for us and our marriage license, even though we got a lawful marriage, Christy Leeper on the one that does the litigation meetings said we needed to sign or send documentation resending our signatures on our marriage license to get rid of it. And maybe that's a process that would work for you. I yield.
Resending your signatures?
Yes, because before you became an American state national, you were deceived. So anything you signed under that de deception is void. So before you knew, what the government was up to, you know, you put signatures on things that you didn't know the power of your signature. And
Right.
that's why as state nationals, we use an autograph and not a signature
Right.
because they will tie you with that signature. So
Right.
if you resend your signature on the previous passport, that may work.
Okay.
So that you, because I know like Dustin, he used to be our coordinator. Back when we first joined in January and February, he had a 5-star
Right.
passport
Right.
because he followed those steps in the moonshine site. I yield.
That's a good point. I ran across something on Mattermost about the marriage license, and I went ahead and got a copy of my marriage license from Florida. And the guy on Mattermost, what he did was he wrote language in a 45-degree angle in red across his application, said no contract, invalid, which I think is kind of like resending the signature. Although I think rescinding your signature is probably a separate letter, which might make more sense. But I think you're right. You have to basically tell the state that this contract is no longer valid. As far as the passport goes, I did the copper moonshine stills, but I had like 6 months left on my passport, and so I sent it in with them. And I got a 3-star card, passport card, and I think the reason I didn't get 5 was because number one, I still have a social security number, and number two, I have a license from the FAA to be an airline transport pilot. So I have ties to the de facto, and I think that's why I didn't get that 5-star.
So,
But,
so how many people are actually, if I'm saying this correctly, rescinding their a social? Because some people, go ahead, Bob. Go ahead, Bob.
The rescinding your signature was part of the 928 package. We had a letter in there that takes our signature off of everything we've done, and now we have autographs. So we had no signature.
You still have to print them, especially legal.
Yeah.
But that's when you would sign with your copyright, right?
That's your autograph.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, that's copyright.
Yeah.
So what I'm talking about, Tom, is how many people actually rescind or do away with their social, because some people saying, well, don't do that because you can still, or whatever. But I hear other people that are actually doing that they're basically
Has Belinda done that?
doing away with it.
I've read quite a bit of stuff on that Sovereign Education Defense Ministry, SEDM,
Yeah.
about Social Security, and everything they say about it makes sense to me. And self-govern, I'm all for getting the benefit that you've paid into Social Security. That makes sense. Hey, I've paid into it for 40 years. I want it back. It's not really a benefit. It's what I'm owed, right? That makes sense. However, to me, any tie to the de facto, I want to get rid of it.
Right. Me too.
From a biblical aspect, God brought his people out of Egypt, not to go back to Egypt from time to time to get some stuff. Hey, Egypt, hey, Pharaoh, I want my paycheck for working for you for 400 years. No, they cut all the ties. He says, you're never going to go back to Egypt. And when I look at Social Security, it's just one more leash, tie, however you want to look. I want to cut it all. As soon as I'm done being an airline pilot, I'm sending them a letter saying that license is no longer valid. Get rid of it, dissolve it. I won't personally want to cut all ties. I don't want anything to do with DC or federal or anything in there. But
Yeah. Some people tried to say that you can't do that, but I think that's wrong. I think you can.
I think you can too. Yeah.
And I talked to a gentleman, his name's Dave Schuster, I think is his last name, from Tennessee. He's a Tennessee Marshal at Arms. And anyway, he was telling me some guy, he didn't give the guy's name, but he's got some kind of deal. He said it like basically makes you invisible, but he wouldn't go in and share anything with me because something to do with the way the gentleman was setting stuff up. But it's supposed to be, the way I understand it, it's a legitimate thing, but I don't know enough about it yet or nothing. I don't know if that's something in time he would share. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Or if it's just right now there's sensitive information or whatever. But I thought it was very fascinating when he said that, because I'd like to be there myself.
Yeah, I would absolutely be on that do not detain list or whatever, or they put you in LexisNexis and nothing shows up. Who are you? You're a ghost, right?
Right, exactly.
All right. So yeah, the birth certificate, that's how we get pulled into the legal back into the sea, right? It's really, when you think about it, I was thinking about this the other day, is that, God made Adam out of the dust of the earth, not out of anything but from the sea, but of the earth. He was born on the soil and of the soil. How are we brought into the earth? Because of the fall, right? We're brought in from the sea, from our mother's water. We are birthed, right, by the doctor. But as soon as we arrive, we're on the land soil. They waste no time getting us back into the sea where they can control us, right? Satan owns the sea. Anna says that a bunch of times in the Jural Assembly Handbook. They waste no time getting us back into their jurisdiction, and it's really diabolical when you think about it. But this whole birth certificate thing is what they do, to get us back into the sea. And so thank goodness for our 928, all our paperwork that does all that. Another way we become legal persons is through adhesion contracts, the Social Security Administration, or the Social Security number, registering to vote, registering vehicles, are all adhesion contracts. They create evidence that you are voluntarily contracting with corporations and choosing to live your life as a legal person. Right? So we need to be really solid when we describe to people why we're doing things, right? Why we're getting rid of our Social Security number if we choose to do so, why we're not registering to vote, not registering our vehicle or getting a driver's license. Why? Because if you do, you're telling them, they have evidence. Look, I have your application for a driver's license right here. You're choosing voluntarily to live as a legal person. Go ahead, Laura.
I was just going to say that Anna tells us not to test the waters. Like, a lot of people are getting locked up for not having plates right now. If you listen to any of Anna's phone calls, and I don't think she really recommends it because she is, plated and insured. Because until we get all of our Jural assemblies set up, like she has said, we don't have much power to go against the license or the registrations. Even though we shouldn't be held accountable for it, they're still locking people up in the assembly over not having a license or not having plates, or trying to get rid of their social security number. So I think the key in taking all these rights back is getting our Jural assembly set up, which is why I'm so happy to be here and so happy that you're doing this. So with that, I'll yield.
No, I think you're right. I got a ticket on Monday for not wearing my seatbelt. I was going about a quarter mile down the street in Crestwood, and I got pulled over, $25. I just paid it. Because everything I've read was exactly like you said, Laura, is we're just not there yet. We just don't have the numbers, the momentum behind us to fight it. And I'm not willing to go to jail for $25, you know, so
But how does that play with the social? Now, I understand with the whole vehicle part that maybe we ought to wait on that, but I was just kind of wondering on the social end.
yeah, how can you get in trouble for getting rid of your social security?
Because, you know, like say for instance, let's say you go to, you go to a bank and there or wherever and they ask for social. If you just say you don't have one because you don't, if you've gotten done away with it, what can they do? You don't have one. You know what I'm saying? I
Yeah.
mean, so
Well, you could say I'm not a U.S. citizen, which you're not. And it's like, hey, I'm from Australia. I want to get a job or I want to open a bank account.
right.
Um, so that's a good. I haven't rescinded the Social Security number yet, but I'm very interested in. I printed out the information to do it from that SEDM website, but I haven't done it yet. But so they have evidence that you did all that, but we have superior evidence, and that's our status correction paperwork. Anything on the land trumps anything on the sea, right? As long as we're standing on the land and we have that superior evidence, we're good to go, right? So when I send Kentucky or Florida, where I got married, when I send them my letter saying no contract, right, that stands because I'm standing on the land and soil. I can do that. If I was still at sea and I wanted to cancel that contract, I don't think you have the ability to do that. The Queen, the Pope, the various presidents, members of Congress, the U.S. military, other parties are all guilty of gross breach of trust, conspiracy against the constitutions, and worse. And that's another thing that's really hard for me to think about is how many people in Congress, they know what's going on and they just choose to go along with it. It's really unsettling to think about that. And folks higher up in the military as well, that they're just going along with this fraud. And maybe they are because they're being pressured, paid off. I mean, who knows? But I think a lot of folks are in on the fraud. Chapter 44, legal persons and territorial courts. What is a legal person and how do they operate in their courts? Once again, legal person is no natural or unalienable rights. They're considered incompetent and they operate statutes, codes, rules, and this is where we get into titles, right? So a legal person has a title, a lot of times Mr. So what exactly is a Mr.? And nobody knows this, right? Most people don't know the significance of this title. But a Mr. in Britain is a warrant officer in the British Merchant Marine Service, be a midshipman in the Queen's Navy, someone engaged in international trade, or a junior officer in the Navy. And if anyone's been in the military, I was a Marine. I was stationed on Navy ships, and they call an ensign. You know, a lot of times they'll call him Mr. And so it is definitely a title. Esquire is another one. Esquire is a squire, the lowest rank of British nobility. And so our British counterparts are fully aware that when they call you Mr. or Mrs. or Miss, they are attaching a title to you. Along with the title go the responsibilities and duties associated with it, all owed to the Queen. And so being aware of what a legal person is and their courts, if they address us as such, we need to be aware of it and be able to respond with the appropriate acknowledgement. So their courts versus our courts, what does that look like? In our courts, once we have our Jural Assembly set up and we're operating our courts, we will, if we're in a case, we're going to represent ourselves. We might have a counselor, but we're going to speak for ourselves, and they will help us instead of them doing all the talking and we just sit there because we're considered incompetent. Our courts will be 12 jurors versus 6, and they will operate under peerage, which was an odd word for me, but apparently it means that when we choose our juries, we're gonna choose a jury that is like the person that's in the case. So if it's a construction worker, a welder, plumber, one of the tradesmen, you're gonna choose a jury of tradesmen to sit on the case. If it's a professor, a teacher, doctor, lawyer, you're going to choose somebody like that to go sit on that jury. So that's that word peerage, which is a new word for me, which I think it makes a lot of sense. That's how our courts operate instead of just go out and choose a bunch of people and throw them in a jury. We have bondsmen versus bailiffs. The role of our justice is to provide that level playing field, right? So our judge or justice is there to oversee everything, make sure it's done right, and they pronounce the sentence that the jury hands down. The sheriff executes the sentence, and the jury decides the law and the facts of the case. So our courts sound much better to me. I like the way they sound. So until we have our courts set up, and so that we have the option to handle conflicts and controversies via private binding arbitration, and they assert our standing as lawful people and request such arbitration whenever any complaint is brought against us in a legal court setting. Private arbitration should be used as a stopgap measure until our own courts are set up and functioning again. Laura, has Christy talked about this private binding arbitration at all?
Can you hear me?
I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I got you.
She has not, but that is a question I would love to come to her with on Monday or Thursday.
Yeah, if you would please, I would like to know more about it. Because I think Anna's saying that we can do this now. But going about setting that up, getting that, I wouldn't know the first thing to do.
I'm sure she has talked about it. I just probably didn't cling on to it because, you know, when you get into this, you're just absorbing so much new material and getting unindoctrinized.
Yeah.
So, but I've screenshotted this and I will definitely ask her tomorrow.
Okay, awesome. All right, last slide. Religion and state assemblies. Anna says the vast majority of our ancestors were Christians. They understood that giving the government any oversight at all of religion led to abuses of religious freedom. To secure and guarantee religious freedom for themselves, they guaranteed the same for everyone, set religion outside the purview of government. Our state assemblies are not religious organizations, and the nature of the assembly itself is secular and civilian. I kind of went back and forth on how I felt about that, but I think it's the right thing to do. What she's saying is that the government works for us. Why should we give somebody who works for us a say in religion or anything that you don't want them to have oversight of? Right? Give them those 19 enumerated powers and go do your job and let us take care of everything else, right? So from that point, it made sense to me that that's how things can get wacky, is if you let the employees make decisions about things like politics, religion, and so forth. So I'm okay with that. Just kind of make it keep it free of the religious aspect, and then in our daily lives we get to do what we want, do no harm, right? Anyone else have any thoughts or feelings about that? The idea that our assembly is going to be secular and civilian. Now, she did talk, talk about, Anna said, Muslim, Christian, Jew. And so the question of a prayer at the beginning of assembly meeting came up. How would you handle that? Well, I'm not going to pray to Allah because I'm not Muslim. So how do you handle that? Well, I think a lot of times you'll see Anna in some of these meetings, they'll do a moment of silence for your creator. And I think maybe that's a democratic way to handle that. But any thoughts on religion in our assembly?
I personally get called mental every time I bring up my religious beliefs in the secular court. And they're all biblical. And I recently sent out a criminal complaint against our volunteer CASA worker because she, was speaking that I'm so mentally out of it. I have ramblings of God, and it highly disturbed me. I thought, well, what is this? It's in biblical scripture. I'm not, quoting anything that isn't in scripture. But I do recall Anna even saying, the Satanists have their right to worship Satan. Like, we have to honor that right of freedom of religion, whatever it may be. But me, I'm a Christian. I think most on the assembly are Christians. So I have heard the vow of silence that you're talking about. And they also won't say amen. They'll say, so let it be. So I think those are strong things because I think our religions have been indoctrinated, and the Pope is a perfect example of it. We, the living people, are the temple of the Holy Spirit, not some Pope that's stealing our birthright and doing all these treacherous things to us that people think are leading them to God when he's doing the exact opposite, if that makes sense. I'll yield.
No, great point. Great point. I guess the only thing about doing a moment of silence to your creator is if you have a couple of atheists on your assembly. But
Yeah, my only thoughts on that is that when you look at the whole separation of church and state, as they say it is that there's not to be a state-run church. So the government shouldn't run or operate the church. However, I don't think this is the way I feel. I'm just going to say it this way. I can't separate my beliefs from what I do. I mean, it's part of who I am. So I think to do that, I don't know how you would do that, how you would basically operate in any fashion and not, if you believe God is your creator and, Jesus or Yeshua, however you want to call his name, and you live that way, I don't know that you can separate that. And I think it does influence what we say and what we do and how we do it. Now, are there ways we can go about it to be respectful with people with other religious beliefs? Yeah. I mean, yeah, we could do a moment of silence, and that's not a problem. I just think it's hard to take yourself out of that completely. I don't know how you can. At least I don't think I can. I yield.
no, that's a good point. I'm in the same boat. Everything I do is for him, and I think maybe the point is that we don't want the government, or we don't want our contractors involved in having anything to say about religion. Go ahead, Laura.
So this is huge for me because my CPS case started and originated in a church that I was teaching Sunday school and all that. There is no separation of church and state. All of our churches in the United States are 501c3 corporations, meaning that the government has the power to rule what the church is doing. So for me, I've had a little bit, and I've always been a huge churchgoer. But since I've learned that fact, and since I personally went through it and witnessed it in my own church, I just I don't believe in separate. Well, I do believe that separation of church and state should exist, but I don't believe that it does exist. I have cried that many times in my own case because, they put my kids with a youth pastor at my church, and he just used my whole testimony against me in court, which, I highly disagreed with. And my testimony for Christ somehow got turned against me. And I just don't see it being a reality of separation of church and state. And for me, being the huge churchgoer that I was, I have refrained from churches knowing that they're all corporate entities. And I'll yield with that.
That's awesome. I never really thought about it that way, that the 501, what is it?
3C or whatever.
Yeah,
5013C.
that they
But
are.
but they can do it like a 508, right? That would be the way to do it.
I think you're correct, but most churches don't.
So the churches have either wittingly or unwittingly linked themselves to the government anyway. So all this talk of church and state, like you said, is kind of moot because they're combined, right?
Right. I mean, that's what we've always been told, separation of church. I'm not saying it's, like it should be, at least from the perspective that we were talking about, that they shouldn't dictate, just like they shouldn't dictate to us as sovereigns. Our rights come from God, not from them. The only rights that man has that we didn't get from God, man created himself. So it's no one above us but God. So we need to, I think, live that way.
Yeah.
At yield.
Go ahead, Bob.
Well, the deal with churches is, the government gives them their tax exempt status. So they're bound by what the government tells them what they can and they can't do. So there is no separation there. They're getting that tax exempt status,
Yeah.
and in return, they're listening to the government.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really great way to look at it. I never really thought of it like that, but yeah, when you talk about separation of church and state, the way they've got it set it up, it doesn't apply, does it?
Yeah, I think the only thing is that 508, and I can't remember if it's 508A or B, I don't know. But I think if you go that route, I think you still get that exempt status, but it is completely separate. That's what I think. I'm not sure though.
And I guess Anna says in the beginning that common law is based on the Ten Commandments. And if you're Muslim, Christian, Jew, you agree with the Ten Commandments. And so if you're going to become a state national and become on the land and soil, you're basically saying, okay, I'm willing to live under the precepts of the Ten Commandments, which is the foundation for common law. There's church and state right there from the foundation. I think the point is, in our dealings with people and land and soil, we kind of want to keep the slate clean, so to speak, as much as possible. And a government running the show, running the government, we're going to keep it secular. I don't know, kind of hard for me to wrap my mind around that, but that's what she says. So that's what it is. Anything else we need to talk about? Next Sunday, we'll plan on wrapping it up, going through chapter 59 and calling it complete. But that's all I've got for tonight. I appreciate y'all being here. I guess everybody's watching the PGA championship or something. Anyway, hope y'all have a great week.
All right,
And,
thanks, Tom.
thanks for your time.
See ya.
You have a good one.
See you, Laura Bob.
See you guys. Bye. Thanks.
Bye, thank you.
See you.
Do you?